Peace. Peace and blessings. Hope that everybody is doing well. Today we're going to talk about spaces, ancestral architecture, how our spaces affect just us in general, but particularly, our spirituality, our connection to our ancestors, our connection to nature and God, how our spaces affect us. So, ancestral architecture. Me personally, when I hear that concept, this term, ancestral architecture, I think to these ancient structures, that we may be familiar with: pyramids, teepees, igloos. These structures exemplify indigenous people's connection to nature, their connection to their environment, and the development of human consciousness. When we think about these ancient structures like pyramids that have survived many things in many years, it's amazing to think how these ancient peoples were able to construct them. And there's still uncertainty around how it was possible when you're talking about these, you know, blocks of stone that weigh, thousands of pounds. It does make you question, how is that possible? And, when we're talking about structures and buildings and living situations, it all comes back to a plan. Like, you just don't build something. I guess you could, but when we're talking about a structure and structures such as those that have to do with one's survival, an expression of one's culture and spirituality, one's knowledge of science, that requires a plan. That requires a architecture, right? It requires a visualization in the mind first. It has to be an idea in the mind first before we get into this notion of building structures, right? And the building block, or the plan for reality itself, as we know it, starts with the atom, right? The atom holds all of the information that make up reality, right? It is this subatomic particle that holds all the information that tells everything else, how to fit, how to construct itself, how to vibrate, how to exist. It are these tiny particles that allow reality to be constructed, right? Because those atoms become molecules, and those molecules become gases, liquids, solids, ethers. And all of those elements make up, what it is that we experience and live within, as far as our body, the earth around us, and the space and stars beyond this earth. All starts with that simple building block. So when I think of the atom, I think of that as the fundamental word of God, or the fundamental design or the architecture, the blueprint of God's creation, right? So the atom. But when we're talking about our relationship to all of these things, right? How is it that we as human beings experience space? How do we experience the things around us? How do we experience this earth? How do we experience each other? How do we experience our homes? The experience of those things happen through the nervous system. And we're all familiar with the five senses, right? We have touch, smell, sight, sound, and hearing. Or I think I said sound. I meant taste. Whichever one I missed. Y'all know what the five senses are. But anyway, the sixth sense, right, that you may hear some people talk about is called proprioception. And proprioception is one's ability to understand how their body is moving in space, right? And there's a particular emphasis on being able to do this without sight. So, for example, if you close your eyes, proprioception is your ability to feel yourself lift your arm up above your head and like know that your arm is above your head, or to feel your hand in front of your face if you were to put your hand in front of your face. But when we're talking about things like coordination in sports, these people have high levels of proprioception. They're able to understand where their body is in space, and they're able to interact dynamically with other moving things, and objects, a basketball, for example. And they're able to handle themselves and understand the space around them. So the sixth sense is understanding where your body exists in space. So that's how we understand, whether consciously or subconsciously, when we're in any type of space, whether it be indoor or outdoor. And I venture off to say mentally or material, a spiritual space or a material space. We're able to understand where we exist in that through our nervous system, which is why the nervous system is so important to have regulated, right? And that brings me to, my next point of what is a space and what is a place? All places are spaces, but all spaces are not places. Places are physical things. The store is a place. Your room is a place. The park is a place. And like I said, all those things are spaces as well. But your mind is not necessarily a place. It's not a physical thing, but it is a space. I know that we all have experienced being in the space of our mind, right? A space can also be your family. 9 times out of 10, you don't live with every member of your family. But there is this intangible connection, emotionally at least. Like there's also physically a connection with, DNA and things like that. But even then, if you all are not existing in the same physical place, you know, then the connection that you all have is a space, right? It's a intangible connection, a intangible enclosement. So again, every place is a space, but every space is not a place. The difference being whether something is material, tangible, something you can feel with your feet and your hands, a place, versus something that is more spiritual, more intangible, more mental space. I want to take a second to talk about a movie. That movie being Inception, right? And just a general premise of what goes on in this movie, or the general theme of this movie as it relates to what we're talking about. The characters are going along a journey of learning how to go into the subconscious mind of other people and extract information. But as it's depicted in this movie, these subconscious places or spaces become things that are analogous or related to in the likeness of physical places that we go through, right? If anyone has heard of the term, a mental palace, right? Having a mental palace, right? So it's this concept of, in our subconscious mind, the way that we categorize our thoughts and categorize our experiences becomes this space over time. It becomes a space that we can journey to and travel to. Right? And in the context of today's video, there is a particular emphasis on spirituality, right? This concept of our connection to our ancestors, our connection to nature, our connection to God. But it is our connection to this other side, right? Our connection to that which is spiritual. How do the physical places that we exist in affect our ability to be connected to that which is spiritual? And that question brings up, different things, but different people have different ways of worshiping and connecting with the divine, right? Many different cultures in the world that have formed throughout the course of human history, and different ways of interacting with the divine have developed. And as we know, along with those different developments have come conflicts and arguments, wars, even today. But I think is what's interesting when we take a look at this concept of places of worship, right? Different places of worship. In the top left corner here, I have a Southern Baptist church, picture of a Southern Baptist church. I want to say that's in South Carolina. On the top right there is a mosque in Morocco. On the bottom, we have a temple in China. These are all places that have been designed for, essentially the same purpose, right? A place where one can come together in community with the same intention to engage with the divine, right? To meditate, to cleanse, to have fellowship, to gain wisdom, to have a safe and sacred space to express one's challenges, right? Places to worship that which is greater than ourselves. And growing up, I really enjoyed going to church. I enjoyed the routine of it, right? Growing up Baptist Christian, I enjoyed, or at least I should say most days I enjoyed it. But getting up, getting dressed up, being around other people who are dressed up. It wasn't until my later years of maturation in which I began really listening to the Bible and the preacher, being able to connect with that. But the music, for as long as I can remember, has always caught my attention. Like my eyes was always locked on to the music, right? The organist or the drummer, right? Keyboardist. And when I would be in these spaces and I would be listening to this music, I remember, and even like still recently, I remember feeling sensations, just feeling the energy. My favorite thing about a Southern Baptist church would be like the praise breaks, right? The praise music. And just like that there to me is the epitome, within my actual experience. That is the epitome of worship, like just the epitome of what I think about or what comes to mind when I'm thinking about like being in a state of praise and worship, right? And just hearing the music, seeing people catch the the Holy Ghost, just the different sounds and just like the ambiance that created, it to me really shifted the way that the space felt, right? I never left the place of church, but based on what was happening, the space changed, right? The ambiance changed, right? And that always fascinated me, and it was always something that I have had an appreciation for. But taking this conversation to more of a indigenous or ancient or nature-based conversation, I want to talk about spaces that may look something like these. Up until this point, we've looked at structures and places that have a element of enclosure, an element of indoor versus outdoor. And in most cases, the indoor of these places would be considered clean, right? You know, or at least that's how you would like it to be. But I think sometimes, or I mean, oftentimes I would feel that if someone were to track dirt into their home, maybe they walked through some mud earlier, and they come into their home, and the dirt begins to break off onto the floor, there would be an urge to clean it up, right? Or that would be dirty, to just leave it there, especially like over time, this dirt building up inside of a home. That's why we clean, vacuum, and mop. But if we look at these two spaces here, these are considered sacred spaces. These are examples of what a shrine would look like, right? On the left there, we have more of a shrine, just based off looking at it, seems to be a shrine to nature itself. Then on the right there, the element, that seems most emphasized is the element of water. But these spaces have been set up with a particular intention, and the desire to worship, to engage in some type of healing, to engage in that communication and fellowship with the divine. And what's interesting about those type of spaces, I had never known anything about that. And I think, naturally growing up in the United States as a Baptist Christian. But my first time being introduced to this type of concept was by an ancestor, Malidoma Somé, and I've spoken about his work before. He's the author of a few books that are in my description, and he talked about these spaces and how to build them, how to go about this idea of creating a space towards that lends itself towards a connection with the divine, a connection with the realm of spirit. And I found it to be very interesting because that was a perspective shift, how this natural space, this outdoor space could be compared to, I could have the same type of experience out there as I could in church, right? But again, it's all about the nervous system. It's all about how the body feels and how you perceive yourself in the space that has been created or that you create. And that is the key, right? Our connection to the realm of spirit has to do with how relaxed, how regulated the nervous system is. So for example, if you go throughout your day to day and you're constantly stressed, you're constantly, overwhelmed, it's hard for you to settle your mind. Well, then no matter what place you go to, it's likely that state of mind will still exist, right? Because your mental space is out of line. And last week we talked about the concept of Ma'at, which is the cosmic order of things that, when related to the human experience, have to do with things like justice, order, harmony, righteousness, right? So no matter what place we find ourselves in, It's important for our mental space to be balanced, and the way that we get there in a practical sense is to have our nervous system regulated, right? And we've talked about different strategies to regulate the nervous system, like breathing. But again, today's episode is focused on these physical spaces and these spiritual spaces that we exist in. And from what I've been able to learn is that, these things have a really profound effect on our nervous system. And it's important to, while we are attending to our mental health and our mental space and doing shadow work and things of that nature, it's also important for us to match our environment with that same effort, that same intention. So what is a house versus a home? Right? A house, again, this takes us back to what we are talking about of a place versus a space, right? A house is a place, right? Maybe you're looking at buying a home, right? You're getting shown a house that's been newly built, may not have any furniture in it. The walls are white. It's just a place. But then, you go ahead and you decide that's the place that where you can envision yourself being, right? Where you can envision your family living and existing. So you buy the home and you move in, right? You move in, you bring in your things, maybe some furniture. And, over time we buy, you figure out how you want to set up the interior, what type of design that you may be going for, what type of color schemes, right? And then after a while, this place begins to look more and more as you envision it, right? And also as time goes along, the things that resonate with you as you relate to this space become more clear, right? Maybe things that you hadn't envisioned, you begin to pick up and incorporate into the space. So then every time you walk into it, then you have that sense of home, right? And there's also other elements to that, like, not just the way that it looks, but the way that it smells. You may have your candles going, your incense, right? You may have particular cleaning products that you enjoy. But also what you do inside this place, home cooked meals, right? Family time. That is what creates the essence of a home. So as I was talking about my experience in church, right? You know, how the actions or the what was happening inside of this place changed how the space felt, or it changed the way that I perceived myself within that space. My sense of proprioception, my sixth sense of the space changed, right? So as we move from a house to a home, it is this transformation of the ambiance, right? So it's a creation of a space that feels good to you for whatever your intentions are, right? The ambiance of a bachelor pad is likely to be much different than the ambiance of a home for a family of four. You know what I'm saying? So this concept of creativity is coming into play in an expression of self. This concept of artistry, right? And largely, I'm talking about the artistry of interior design, or what we know to be interior design, but also, the artistry of existing in a space and having the routines that align with what it is that you're getting out of that space. If you want to come home and you want to relax, the way that you set up your space will dictate how well you're able to relax, right? If you got a space that's meant to host parties, same thing. So it's important to have a plan for what we want our space to look like, right? To have a blueprint. And I'm a musician, right? So I make music, I produce music, and before I began producing music, I would just play the piano, right? And it would just be something that I did. The piano was my workspace, and I would learn songs and play the piano. But then around my junior year of high school, I got into a class, right, called Music and Sound, right? And in this class, there were actual studio space, right? There was an actual studio with a computer and instruments in there for production to happen. So my interaction with music, with the creation of music, moved from just being at a piano and learning songs at the piano to making music in a studio, being at a computer, working with music production software, right? Moving around from the computer to the keyboard. The space began to shape my interaction, right? And also at that time, I was working with other people as well. My first time having a home studio, before I did anything, before I bought anything, I was like, how do I want this space to look? Now that I've had this experience making music, I have a feel for it. How do I want that to develop? Right? So I wrote it down. I drew pictures. I made a blueprint of exactly how I wanted my room to look. And then when I purchased the things that I purchased, I set up my room. The ambiance was perfect. And my creativity flowed like it never had before. Because the space demanded that of me, right? And I had planned for the space to demand that of me. Right? So it's important that whatever it is that your intentions are, whatever you're trying to go in life, whatever your goals may be as you engage on this process of self-healing, and shadow work and coming into peace and regulating your nervous system and engaging in holistic health, that's a lot to deal with. That's a lot of moving pieces. So spaces are very important. You have to create the space for you to even be able to sit down and do anything of that nature. Because as we've spoken about as well, the space of this country, the system that we exist in, the matrix, right? This digital space that a lot of us exist in day to day is not designed for you. It is not set up with the architecture for you to exist in a state of peace, in a state of progression towards your best interests. It's set up for you to, quite honestly, be docile and to follow instructions. You know, Like if you think about a prison cell, or I think it's been interesting to see like when people compare a prison cell to a college dorm room because they look quite similar. It's very basic. It's very bare bones. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of space to move around. It's a space to rest and go about, you know, what it is that you're supposed to go about in either of those environments. But to have your own space, it is important. Whether that space is a room, 'cause, we're all in different situations. You may have a home, you may have an apartment, you may simply have a room. You may only be able to muster up, a closet to call, your own per se. Excuse me. So the question becomes, with the space that I have, how do I design it in such a way that it demands from me progression towards my intention? And as we talk about designing something like that, I think well, and the word intention has come up multiple times as I've been speaking, right? But then we have the term of cleanliness, right? So when it comes to cleanliness and intention in these spaces that we're designing, right? Cleanliness can also be, or I think a segue between cleanliness and intention is organization. Everything having its place, right, to go. Right. But when I say cleanliness, I mean the least amount of noise to achieve what it is that you're trying to achieve, right? Because as we talked about earlier, cleanliness may be different for an outdoor space, versus an indoor space, right? Cleanliness, if I'm creating a space for ritual outdoors, may just be the organization of certain elements in a way that looks pleasant or that captures the essence of what I'm going for at that moment. But for, my room, it may be I need to vacuum and, you know, pick clothes up, organize things, wipe things down, sage, incense, open a window. Right? There's different things that we look at, right? But the intention is to clear the path to your intention, to lessen the noise, right? If your intention is to meditate, it's not likely that you would choose to, go sit on a New York subway to meditate. It wouldn't, there would be a lot of noise to you getting to your intention. But it may be in your best interest to, go to the park and sit by a river stream, right? So it's important to identify the intention, right? That blueprint first. What are you even trying to create and what for? And then to understand the things that you would need to do to maintain the cleanliness, or the maintain a clear connection. So when we, when we go to church, right? There's a particular organization to the way that the service flows, right? And there are certain aspects to the service that serve particular purpose, right? And I think that prayer is that time of cleansing and focusing and intention setting, you know. And then there are the aspects of the service that are for, praise and worship, like I was talking about with the music. Then we have the reading of the word where we are being fed and nourished, right? It may be first Sunday, right? You may be doing communion. But, there's an intention and an organization during that service that allows for people to come there and, you know, be saved, so to speak, right? There's a cleanliness and an intention, right, to the way that that flows. So as you're setting up your space, it's important to take those things into account, right? When you come into your room after a long day and you have set your mind on the intention of every day I want to do something that is conducive to my betterment holistically, right? So when I come in, you know, I'm going to take a shower, I'm going to take some time to journal and meditate. Then I'm going to take some time to, learn a skill, for example. Or I'm going to take some time to pray and read my Bible. Then after I'm done with that, I'm going to put those things where, I have set designated space for them to be. And I'm going to close that out and go about my evening or go about the rest of my day. There's a particular ritual to it. There's a particular, process to it. And this, that brings me to, an important concept in what it is that we're talking about today, and that is the concept of ritual, and from the African perspective, right? So I'm going to read a passage from one of Ancestor Malidoma's books entitled Ritual, that serves as a definition for that concept, right? So, ritual draws from this area of human existence where the spirit plays a life-giving role. We do not make miracles. We speak the kind of language that is interpreted by the supernatural world as a call to intervene in a stabilizing way in a particular life. Consequently, our role in ritual is to be human. We take the initiative to spark a process, knowing that its success is not in our hands, but in the hands of the kind of forces we invoke into our lives. So the force field we create within a ritual is something coming from the spirit, not something coming from us. We are only instruments in this kind of interaction between dimensions, between realms. So in that passage, Ancestor Somé emphasizes that from the African perspective, specifically from his culture, the Dagara people of West Africa, believe that the purpose of a ritual is to release control and to allow the intention in a space to guide you towards what it is that you desire. And I think that that brings up a thing of vulnerability and safety, comfort. If a space does not allow you the trust in, if it does, if you do not trust the space to serve your intention, you won't be able to get comfortable. You won't be able to feel safe. You won't be able to be vulnerable. Or in other words, you will be closed off to supporting forces, whether that be God, the Holy Spirit, nature, your ancestors, right? That connection won't be able to be formed, right? And that's that type of noise that I'm talking about. The removal of noise is really the removal of that human desire to control what is happening or to manage things that we cannot control. So it becomes important when we're engaging in this process of healing and we have set a space aside to do that, that space really makes us feel comfortable. That really has to be one of the top priorities of whatever your intention is, right? Because in the context of healing, it really is all about that. If you don't feel safe, healing can't happen, right? You can't bulldoze your way through trauma. It don't work like that, you know. You can't brute force the healing process, right? You're gonna end up just straining yourself more or doing more damage, right? And I struggle a lot with the patience and the releasing control and the aspect of slowing down and allowing things to take place without having my heart be so agitated, you know, having my mind, you know, sifting through all these concepts and things and information. So having intention, right, is the only way that we can really, do this thing, to be intentional. And to close out, the rest of our conversation here, I'm just going to talk about some of my different experiences of spaces throughout the course of my life, just to give more perspective on this concept that I'm talking about. But as I do that, feel free to leave any questions or comments. Um, as I'm going through, share any of your experiences if you feel uh, inclined to. But give me 1 second, right quick. Okay. So I first want to talk about like some of my childhood spaces and it's like some of my early memories on this concept of relating to a space. Um, I would say one of the core aspects of my early memories um, is living in spaces that had some element of clutter, right? Where, things were never necessarily dirty, but like there would just be things around, paper, clothes, just like an excess almost, you know. So it was never a completely organized space, maybe always like 85% organized. And I, began to, like I say, it's my early experiences, so that just became an adjustment. Like I just adjusted to that, My proprioception, my sixth sense adjusted to coming home and, existing in that way. And I feel that pretty early on I began, I won't necessarily say early on, but there was definitely a point where in that type of environment, it was definitely important for me to have my room organized, at least my space completely organized. Or, as much as a adolescent, boy can be organized, you know what I'm saying? But that was definitely a defining characteristic of childhood spaces. And not just, my space, but just like all of the family members that I frequented, that same type of thing. I'll say something that I've experienced more in recent times though has been travels to different states, right? Whether it be visiting family or doing whatever, and being in these different environments. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, right, the Midwest. Pretty cold, or we get all the seasons, but pretty cold winters. So there's a certain thing about the environment that affected the spaces as well, right? The weather, right? But in more recent years, I began to go to places like South Carolina, Texas, right? And in more of that heat, more of that tropical essence, my perception and just the way that I felt definitely changed, and my connection to that ancestor energy definitely shifted. And being around different family members, different aspects of, either my mom's side of the family or my dad's side of the family, just connecting to these different energies. And, I went to school in Nashville, and that was a different space, and being in that context of the college experience and other young adults, figuring themselves out on college campus. But I can definitely say for myself, no, I definitely shift to adapt to the environment on a subtle level. It deeply influences my psychology, you know. And I find that oftentimes that's why I like to be in my space, with myself, you know. Definitely an introverted person. I'm not a big party goer. I, I don't like the ambiance of that. It's overstimulating for me, being around a lot of people. But in more recent times, the most of recent times, like the past couple of years, past few years, and I would say the emphasis is really on my previous situation versus the living situation that I'm in currently. My previous situation, even the thing, even the transition into moving there was very abrupt. Um, and it was when a lot of the things in my life had begun to change, and I began to go through a lot of things emotionally. And the environment definitely reflected that, in a sense of disorganization, clutter. It's a very it's a very if I had to describe the way that it felt, the ambiance of that living situation felt very thick and heavy. And that forced me to go inward, right, for the first time really in my life. And the journey of moving, or the journey of having to exist within myself and really listen to myself and my intuition and this mental space of mine, my spirituality, and having to bring that out against this heaviness and denseness that was around me physically was definitely a journey, right? And it took many things. Um, and one of the greatest things that helped me during that period was studying the African worldview, was studying this concept of ritual, this concept of, ancestral veneration, or, honoring one's ancestors. But I had to fight for that connection. I had to, like, really, sift through like unpleasant energy and circumstances to like get that clean connection, get that clean signal, you know. But now having moved to Atlanta, to the place where I was born, having this fresh start, and having brought with me habits around physical cleanliness, but also those habits of engaging in ritual, and really having a routine in place, there's a huge difference in, that connection, that signal, and that's something that without I wouldn't be able to engage and progress in the healing work as I do. I wouldn't be able to engage in my creative endeavors as I do, if I didn't spend the time to, you know, maintain the signal. And to me, that is the greatest essence of the warfare, living in this country, living and escaping the so-called matrix. It is really about holding and maintaining a space of clean connection to the Most High, our ancestors, and ourselves, so that we can every day or consistently be in the act, be in the ritual of bringing about, manifesting what it is that our desires are, right? This concept of manifestation, you know, I feel it has been taken as something that's supposed to happen immediately and like without work, like magic. Magic is not, abracadabra and snap your fingers. You know what I'm saying? This realm that we live in requires work. You know what I'm saying? And that's an important thing to take into account. So I do have a question here, and if there are any other questions, go ahead and leave them. But talking more about this concept of like a mental space, right? a mental palace. It is a way of organizing your brain, organizing your thoughts, right? The mind is how we experience everything, right? And for a lot of us, that happens in words, right? Words and images, memories. So constructing a mental space is constructing a system of organization, right? I've oftentimes understood my mental palace to look like a library, you know, like a college library or something like that, right? So things are alphabetized and organized, put on shelves. That is what brings me peace, right? There's tables in there for me to be able to sit and study. I can take down the things that I need and, be able to do that. But for another person, maybe their mental palace and their way of organization is, something that looks like a home, just a warm space, a porch, right? To be able to watch your emotions drive past, to be able to observe the nature around you and to just have clean air, fresh air to breathe. Right. So when it comes to constructing a mental space, my biggest tips would to be as far as like architecture goes, or like those building blocks. So as if we were going to build an actual space, we have to have the architecture. We have to gather the materials, and we have to build it out in, you know, um, layers. We have to build it out in phases, right? So the first phase for me is we have to get all of the noise out first. So this is where things like brain dumps and letters come into play, right? So brain dump again is about writing just your stream of consciousness thoughts, whether they're full sentences or just words, just sitting down for a period of time and not lifting your hand up, just writing what's on your mind, dumping your brain. Letters are that more deeper work where we're taking these things that really bother us on a day-to-day basis, things that we may ruminate on, and we're really working through them and saying what it is that we have to say, good, bad, and ugly, right? Really writing those things out and taking your time, feeling what it is that you're feeling, and being able to read that back to yourself, or read it out loud. So that's what I would say as far as, that first phase, right? Because now you can actually hear yourself in God, right, and your ancestors. You can engage with your intuition because now you don't have the weight and the shadow and the denseness in the way and making noise. So that next phase would be to, okay, now you envision. What do you desire? How do you want to think? What do you want to be learning? What conversations do you want to be having with yourself and with others? Going through that in a detailed manner, outlining that, and then figuring out a practical way for you to engage in that every day, whether that may be, okay, every day I'm going to write down what I desire, and I'm going to read, this book that helps me with this thing that I've been struggling with, or helps me learn the skill that I've been wanting to learn. And then okay, let's do this. So it's not so general. Let's talk about travel, right? Your goal is to travel. That's something that will change your life, something that will help you along your healing journey, right? So your intention is to travel. Okay. You want to travel to, let's say, Africa, right? You want to travel to Ghana, right? So you begin to research Ghana. You want to see where you want to go, right? You find that place, you find the hotel you want to be at, you find, what activities you want to do. Make your itinerary. Get that straight. Make sure you got pictures and all that. See it. Have it defined. That's the goal. Okay. Understand what type of experience do you want to have. Say you want to really be able to connect with the locals. You want to enjoy the food. So you say, okay, I want to learn a little bit of Twi, and I want to learn how to make some dishes, or at least want to taste what they taste like, right? So on the food tip, you can see, are there any Ghanaian restaurants around me? Any Afro restaurants around me that I can experience some of those flavors? Look up recipes online. Try to, just get a feel for those spices, those seasonings, right? Those textures, right? Then on the other hand, with the Twi, learn some useful phrases. Maybe buy you a phrase book, right, that you can go through, right? So now we're gathering all these materials, right? You may want to go and get you, a nice dashiki, or what I'm saying, a nice gown with African prints on it, right? Some jewelry, some natural jewelry, right? So you're gathering your materials to go and build the experience that you're trying to have, right? So then you have these materials, you understand what it is that your intention is within your mental palace. Now that you've done the brain dump, you've written your letters, you've addressed all these limiting beliefs that you have around travel and money, the money and time freedom to travel, right? And every day you say, I'm going to write down the experience that I'm going to have in Ghana, right? Maybe you even writing down some of your phrases in Twi, right? Maybe every week, you make sure within your mental space, but also within your home, right? You're reading your recipes and experimenting with those flavors. And then, just doing other things that will prepare you for the vision. The point in all of that is now you've created a pretty clear vision of getting to Ghana and like your experience. And if you sit there every day and you engage with that in your mental space, it has to come about somehow. But the thing about, what I like about this, and what I know about, my understanding of nature, and that it is mental. Now that you've constructed your mental space around that and your vision is clear, now God, the Holy Spirit, your ancestors, they can all come in and, drop something on your spirit. Look this up. Look up this excursion, right? One day you're on the internet and somehow, you was doing something else and you find yourself at a particular, travel agency. Phenomena will start to happen that support you. So the thing about the mental space is clarity and organization, right? How we talked about cleanliness and intention. That is how you make up that mental space, right? And you want to engage with it consistently, and as intensely as you desire whatever it is that you desire to experience. But maybe you don't have a specific goal like that right now, and it's something more like broad. The uh, the 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 process is the same, right? Getting that clear vision, making your blueprint, gathering your materials, and engaging with the daily actions, and engaging with even other people who can help you construct this space. So that is what I will say about, that aspect of the concept. But a big tip is to have, our mental space to match the essence of our physical space, because if not, there will be a lot of pressure on that sixth sense of proprioception. But if you find ma'at between your mind and your physical space, right? If you find that cosmic balance between your mind and your physical space, then they can come together and fit together. And then the presence of, spirit and our ancestors can help us as we begin to do our part, but also, leave it to, leave it to the universe, leave it to God to help us work out, all of those uncertainties and questions. But it doesn't seem that I have any more questions. So that's pretty much what I have for today. In the description, I have the link to Malidoma Somé's book Ritual and the rest of his books, and links to my endeavors and my projects. But I also have in the description free journal prompts to help us begin that process of gaining clarity, right? And identifying intention. And I also have my ebook, Defeating Anxiety and Depression Through Art, right? How do we use the creative process and creative thought to bring ourselves into states of mental peace, regardless of anxiety or depression? But with that said, wishing everybody a pleasant evening. And for those of you watching the replay, a pleasant time and moment wherever you are. And, yeah, create a space. Allow your imagination to flow and really hone in on the spaces that you want to be in. And figure out what materials are required and how to design it. How do you want it to look? It's much easier to bring something about when you know how it looks. How it feels, how it smells. Right? Put yourself there. Take advantage of your sixth sense and put yourself where you want to be. And allow spirit to help that manifest, right? Carry your body to that mental space. Ashe. But all right, peace and love.